Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. Now this book is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. John Williams, huge fan, been talking about him on my channel for a while now. He's getting a lot of YouTube, booktube love, which is great. And I read Stoner early 2022. So I thought it was just fitting to read Butcher's Crossing at the end of the year to kind of bookend my year. I'm going to be reading his two other books this year too, so I've read all of his books. But this one was really good. Very different to Stoner, almost the complete antithesis of Stoner in many ways. It's kind of like an adventure story. The main character, who I will come on to later, is very different to the character of Stoner. We still have the kind of signature beautiful prose, but the actual kind of thematic work is quite different. So the plot of this book is that we are essentially following four men on the trail of buffalo. It's like an adventure story. It's a Western, a very classic Western. It's one of those stories, again, where it doesn't really feel like there's tons happening, but there's actually a lot happening under the surface. It's very much a character study, in my opinion, just like Stoner is. We're really connecting with these individuals, specifically the main character, and we're going on this journey with them and kind of going through the trials and tribulations with them. So without further ado, let's jump into my review. What did I love about this book? What was good about this book? Some of the most beautiful prose that I've ever read. John Williams is a master in writing beautiful prose. We have very vivid descriptions of buffalo herding and skimming buffalo skins. Like, you'll learn a lot about surviving in the wilderness and like buffaloes reading this book. It's quite interesting actually. Like, a lot of people will find that boring, so bear that in mind, but I loved it. I just thought it was very vivid. I felt like if there was a buffalo in my street, I could probably go skin it. Not that I would, but I'm just saying, I feel like I've learned it through the main character that I would be skilled enough to do it. Not saying that you should do that, but just going to put that out there. But it was just very beautiful, like very cinematic almost. Like, you feel like, I mean, I actually think there is a movie of this, but I feel like it would be very easy to film a movie of this, just given how cinematic it is and how cinematic the prose is. The other thing about this book is that it is a slow burn. A lot of people aren't going to like that. I love that because, again, like I said, it's very much a character study. We're very much focused on these people's thoughts and, you know, the day in, day out things that they have to do to survive. And I really love that. Like, I really love when you're just alone with these characters' thoughts as they're basically fighting for survival and trying to make the best of a situation. Be aware of that. I think some people will have to be in a very specific mood. For me, I don't really care. I like those types of books. I'm all here for it. And I personally just really enjoyed it. The characters are really interesting. So like I said, we follow four main characters. Well, we follow one main character and then there's kind of three side characters. The main character is called Will Andrews. He's a little lost trying to figure out his life. And he leaves Harvard to basically find a new path for himself, to determine a new path for himself. And when he ends up going on this incredible journey where he ends up doing that, and I'll come on to that more later. We then follow Miller. He's a frontiersman who knows where the buffalo herd is, so he's essentially the kind of pack lead in a way. Then we have Charlie Hogue. He is a one-handed skimmer. He lost his hand from a previous expedition because he was left out in the cold and he basically had to chop off his arm because couldn't feel anything in it, essentially. And he's very religious. He carries a Bible around with him and he always throws in these like religious one-liners, which I thought was really interesting. Then the last person that we have is Fred Schneider. He is another skinner and he basically kind of teaches Will to kind of survive and how to skin these buffaloes. Fred is really interesting because he's kind of like the black sheep of the group. I'm not going to say anything more than that because I don't want to spoil it though. The characters are really interesting because of the dynamic between them. You know, we have Will, who is the one who's funding the trip, and then so he's kind of like the patron in a way. But then Miller, Charlie, and Fred are basically his employees in a way. But then Will is also the most inexperienced, so he's kind of at their mercy to kind of for them to teach him. So there's just this really interesting kind of relationship that develops between all of these folks. I just really love some of the interactions because I thought it was really revealing of certain characteristics that each of them had. Moving on, I'm going to go on to the setting. The setting is super desolate. It's very beautiful, but it's very desolate. It feels almost like the characters are being reduced to their most base instincts. They're, to an extent, experiencing elemental extremes. You know, when they first start off, the weather isn't that bad, but then, you know, there's rainstorms, snowstorms, then it kind of gets sunny some days, there's extreme colds, extreme heat. So we're really seeing these people being reduced to our most kind of basic evolutionary instincts in a way. And like I said, this book in some ways is a fight for survival, and we really see that in their interactions as well, and also in Will's own kind of internal reflections, which I loved. I just thought it felt very raw, very unfiltered. I feel like, you know, if you're somebody who has done this before, you could probably sympathize with it quite a lot, because it just felt very, yeah, it just kind of felt very real. Next, I think the tone is really interesting. The tone of this book is quite placid. There's like a stillness to it, and I'm going to use the same word again, a rawness to it that I don't think you get with Stoner, and I haven't really seen done in tons of books. I almost felt quite meditative as I was reading it, because it is as much of a psychological journey as it is a spiritual and a physical one. A lot of the time, you know, we are in the head of Will, and we get this sense of, you know, his thoughts and his very raw thoughts of what it's like to be in that situation. And I feel like a lot of us, if we were experiencing what he's experienced for the first time, we could identify with it. And I love that kind of combination of the physical, the spiritual, the psychological, because I feel like that's, you know, that's what makes a human, is we have these different experiences, and we have these different ways that we experience things. We experience them physically or emotionally or spiritually, and that ultimately makes us human. So it was very nice to kind of see that on the page, or read that on the page, because I've not really experienced that before in any book that I've read. So I love that. The other thing kind of tied to this is because of the thematic work, right? I mean, a big part of this book is that it's a story about a young man who's trying to figure out himself and trying to figure out his purpose. And he's putting himself out of his comfort zone, which I totally respect. And I just love the fact that we kind of get this very unglamorized look at what that requires, right? To put yourself out of your comfort zone and to discover new things that you haven't typically discovered. And I just loved it. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. And I think all of us who have done things maybe differently or taken on new risks can identify with that in one way or another. Maybe to a much lesser extreme, but we can identify with it in one way. The other thing that I really loved was there's lots of descriptions of nature and like the beauty of nature. And I think, I don't know John Williams' like personal, you know, kind of political or societal perspectives, but I feel like he himself maybe really appreciated nature, because I just don't think you would have been able to write nature in that way if you didn't. There's a real appreciation for it that I loved, and that I just kind of really identified with as somebody who loves nature myself and really appreciates it when I'm in nature. And it made me want to go out for a walk, which I ended up doing when I was reading this book, which I loved. And then lastly, the last kind of theme is that this idea of us living a simple life. I think a lot of people think a simple life is maybe an easier life. I think that's absolute nonsense and rubbish. I think living a simple life isn't always the easiest path to take. It's often more hard. You're often grafting a lot, and you're often just trying to fight for survival. Yes, it may be more simple in many ways, but in some ways, when you reduce a lot of the noise out of your life, you're kind of left to face the world in a very unfiltered way, if that makes sense. For me, it kind of made me think about like how I've been a big fan of simplifying my own life over the last 6 months, because there's a lot of noise out there, external noise, but then there's also a lot of internal noise too. Constantly trying to think about how can I minimize that noise as much as possible so that I can do what I need to do and focus on the things that I want to focus on. And I think this gave an interesting perspective on that, at least for me. So I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I don't think there's going to be any Williams book that I'm going to give less than 5, to be honest. I'd be very surprised. But I thought it was a really interesting insight into the rawness of human emotion, about, you know, how we push ourselves and about how we can affect others, often negatively actually, and how we often have to rely on ourselves to be able to kind of survive, essentially. And I just thought it was fantastic. I'm going to read a few quotes because I think it makes sense to. So one quote I'm going to read is this one. "Well, there's nothing," McDonald said. "You get born and you nurse on lies, and you get weaned on lies, and you learn fancier lies in school. You live all your life on lies, and then maybe when you're ready to die, it comes to you that there's nothing but yourself and what you could have done. Only you ain't done it because the lies told you that there was something else. Then you know you could have had the world because you're the only one that knows the secret. Only then it's too late. You're too old. Oh, so good. It's really good. All of his books just really make you think. All right, I'm going to read maybe 2 or 3 more. We'll read 2 more. I'm going to read this one because it kind of shows more of the physicality of this book that I really loved. So here we go. After a while, Andrews began to perceive a rhythm in Miller's slaughter. First, with a deliberate slow movement that was a tightening of the arm muscles, a steadying of his head, and a slow squeeze of his hand, Miller would fire his rifle. Then quickly he would eject the still-smoking cartridge and reload. He would study the animal he had shot, and if he saw that it was cleanly hit, his eye would search among the circling herd for a buffalo that seemed particularly restless. After a few seconds, the wounded animal would stagger and crash to the ground, and then he would shoot again. The whole business seemed to Andrews like a dance, a thunderous minuet created by the wildness that surrounded it. Such beautiful writing. All right, I'm going to find one more. Okay, I'm going to read this one. He was unable to view himself, again as if he were a stranger. He thought of himself as he had been a few months before at Butcher's Crossing, looking westward from the river at the land he was now in. What had he thought then? What had he been? How had he felt? He thought of himself now as a vague shape that did nothing, that had no identity. And there we go. Butcher's Crossing, everybody. Strongly recommend. 5 stars. Wonderful story. I think it's probably best to start with Stoner and then read this. But then again, I don't think it really matters because, like I said, they're pretty different. And I don't think if you didn't enjoy Stoner, that doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy Butcher's Crossing. So give it a go and let me know what you think. If you have read it, let me know. Love this book. It was fantastic and I'm very excited to talk about it. So I'll see you down in the comments. As always, folks, stay safe, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.